I'm Ken Fjord. Last year, I wrote a book for my son entitled The Graysonian Ethic, Lessons for My Unborn Son, in the months before he was born. Once he was born, I published the book on Amazon. He's now a happy bouncing baby, and I've decided to release the audiobook version for free on YouTube. On attraction, before I start with any of this, I'd like to talk a bit about safety, love, marriage, procreation. These three things are some of the most important things you'll experience in your life. They're ultimately things that will prove more important than a lot of the materialistic pursuits you'll spend your life on. These three things will give you emotions more powerful than any single thing you ever experience. Sometimes they're a roller coaster. The highest highs, the lowest lows. It's an incredible ride. Just because it's important, powerful, and amazing doesn't mean it's necessarily perfectly safe. I've known people who were incredibly successful with the opposite sex, both men and women. Just being able to get people in bed didn't ultimately make them happy, however. Having this one tiny slice of life without having the rest of the things you need to live well is almost worse than having nothing at all. You can really mess up your life with love, marriage, or procreation if you're not careful and smart. Having children before your life is established can mean you're going to end up working with a massive handicap. Having children with someone you weren't going to be able to stay with could mean a lot of problems, from paying child support to having to stay in the same city because that's where your kid's parent is, to having to stay in touch with an absolute cycle because you're forever bound with this person through the child you share. Myself, I'm pretty unusual. I actually waited until I was ready to settle down and get married before I really started focusing on women. That's not for everyone, but I was just very focused for reasons I talk about in the chapter called Failure is an Option. Regardless, I want to say it's okay to put off romance for a while, until you're ready. If you don't want to put off romance, it's okay to put off the act of intercourse until you're older. If you don't want to put off that act, for the love of God, at least wear protection. Be in control of your own life. Sun Tzu says that the wise general will choose the battlefield. Make the decision of when and where in your life you procreate. Your child will be amazing, I'm sure. Just make sure you're in a position in your life to give that life the sort of care it will deserve. Our society treats romance and intercourse as trivial. It absolutely isn't. It's substantial. You can be emotionally hurt. You can be physically harmed. You can change your life for the better or for the worse in ways that will ripple throughout your bloodline for generations. Whatever you do, treat it with the respect it deserves. Secondly, I have gotten in trouble for this. So let me make something perfectly clear. I recognize that other sexualities exist, but if you think that I can tell you how as a gay man to attract other gay men, or how as a lesbian woman you attract other women, you are barking up the wrong tree. If you want to go find out how to be gay, ask a gay. Not lying here, I'm going out on a stretch just guessing how women might attract a man. I also acknowledge that discrepancies between biological sex and gender identity can exist. And at that point there just is no way I can help. How does a female stuck in a biologically male body attract someone? How does a male stuck in a biologically female body attract someone? How does someone who is neither male nor female stuck in one biological body or the other attract someone? How the heck should I know? I'm not stopping anyone from reading this, but please keep in mind I can only give advice based on experiences I've actually encountered. With that said, onto the essay. The basic drive for all life can be summed up as survival and replication. It is a little bit axiomatic because only life that strives to survive and reproduce exists over the long term. Reading about geology and paleontology is very interesting because on those timelines you begin to realize just how small you are and how much little things add up over a very long time. My favorite example is the oxygen catastrophe. Life overwhelmingly relied on metabolizing carbon dioxide to exist, and once most of the carbon dioxide had been metabolized, major oxygen sinks started to be used up. For example, the Earth was made of iron, and all that iron had to rust before oxygen could accumulate in the air. Fitting that an event called the oxygen catastrophe, and the single greatest extinction event in the history of the planet, also stained the Earth red. The ones that survived were the ones that were able to survive. There was some microbial life that was either tolerant to oxygen or was actively utilizing it at that time, and those forms of life thrived, whereas forms of life that found oxygen poisonous disappeared. The same thing happened a lot of times. I think 5 or 6 or 7 times the dominant forms of life on the planet died out because the fundamental rules of the game changed. Some amazing things happened over billions of years. Anytime that you see soapstone, that is made up of billions of years of little microbes and other life compacting together, and all the stuff that does not rot stayed behind and turned into this form of rock that never existed on the planet before. All the carbonates did not just come out of nothing. They came from life combining carbon together to form a hard shell, and that happening probably trillions of times, and all of those forms of life dying, and all of their carbonate shells packing together to become this type of rock. You can read about the forests that covered the planet at one point, and there was absolutely nothing that could attack the wood, and so these massive forests just grew and grew and grew. The trees would die, and over millions and millions and millions of years all this life that could not really go anywhere just compacted together, and became what today is coal. Later in history, fungi would evolve the ability to eat wood, and suddenly wood could rot. And so that little moment in time called the Carboniferous period is the source of most of the planet's coal. And all the while, species come to exist out of other species and live or die, and only the species that survive and produce offspring get to move on. We like to pretend that the human race is different, that because we can think and are conscious, we are somehow above those animal impulses. That is false. In a lot of ways you do not realize. The human race is entirely defined by our biology. Many of your deepest rooted fears and ambitions are written into your blood, in a library that was passed down by millions of generations of successful creatures going all the way back to the single-celled organisms that first spawned within the primordial ooze. Many of these things absolutely keep you alive. When you are lacking food, if you did not get hungry and you did not eat, you would die. You do not need to be taught that you need to eat. When you are lacking water, you will get thirsty, and if you do not drink, you will die. You do not need to be taught that you need to drink. In fact, besides these very base impulses, there are much higher level impulses that are also pushed by our biology. There are a lot of things related to mating that you have never been taught. You just know. If you are a man, no one needs to tell you that you are attracted to a pretty girl. On the other hand, no one needs to tell you that you are nervous when you are about to talk to a girl that you like either. Some of our urges are almost transcendental in the sense that they have existed so much longer than humanity, so much longer than ground-dwelling life. In fact, you could consider them to be universal. Being worried about talking to a pretty girl, that is almost uniquely hominid. Having fears about certain social situations makes absolutely no sense in a setting before social animals. Some of those rules may have been written by our pre-hominid ancestors, as well as hominids coming all the way up to Homo sapiens. The thing to realize and remember is that most of those rules were not written during an age where billions of human beings existed. For most of the existence of hominids and pre-hominid life, your entire society, and everyone in it would be made up of maybe 50 people. That might be all the people that you ever met in the history of your life. Maybe once in a while, you might come up against another society, and maybe there would be conflict at that time. But overwhelmingly, you would be talking about the sort of people that never see anyone outside of their social group. In that 50-person society, social niceties are not just a nice idea, they are literally matters of life and death. Human beings are social animals, and if you take away a person from their society, the odds are that person is going to die. They are never going to reproduce, and the story of their bloodline ends. If you want to know why people feel such anxiety over social situations, that is why. It is written into our blood, the lessons from all the people who made it. It is hard to imagine right now, but the human race has been on the brink of destruction at times. According to scientists, every human being on the planet is descended from one woman who's been named mitochondrial Eve. Mitochondria are symbiotic organisms that exist within animal cells that convert sugars into more refined fuels. They are essential to most animal life because without these specialized organisms, animal cells would have to maintain a method to convert coarser sugars into more refined fuels themselves, and that is rather costly compared to just having a symbiotic organism do it for us. There are several single-celled organisms that do not rely on mitochondria. In some cases, the main cell basically just absorbed the functions of the mitochondrial cell, and in other cases they independently evolved a separate method to refine those sugars. But multicellular life almost universally has mitochondria. The first mitochondria are contained in the mother, and so mitochondria are passed down from mother to child. It is matrilineal. Mitochondria has its own DNA as it is an independent organism living within our cells, and we can sequence that DNA. As far as we can tell, there is only the one person that all our mitochondria descend from. There was probably a time where the human race was so close to the brink of destruction, and it was the offspring of mitochondrial Eve who happened to be strong enough to survive and replicate. Just imagine, every human being alive is a descendant of this one woman. And this was not the first human being either. It was just one particular choke point in the history of civilization. Imagine that all the other mothers in that generation were unable to produce offspring who were capable of surviving and replicating over generations. Every single one of them, the story of their bloodline ended around there. In such a cutthroat world with such a small number of options, it is only understandable that taking risks that could lead to the extinction of your bloodline would cause incredible anxiety. In the 50-person society, mating would be extremely high stakes. Of those 50 people, you can assume half of them would be women. Some of them would be too young, some of them would be too old. And so in between you would have a very small number of eligible mates. And among those very small number you would have to pick the person most likely to produce kids strong enough to survive the astronomical infant mortality rate. When you are attracted to a beautiful woman, it is not because you are vain. It is because if you do not pick the healthiest woman to produce the healthiest child, then not only might your child die, but so will your mate. It is a life and death game. For this reason, both men and women are programmed with very specific instructions passed down from our ancestors. The fact is, we do not live in that world anymore. First, almost every person who's born will make it to adulthood. And frankly, most people who make it to adulthood are fully capable of meeting someone and having kids. More importantly, we do not live in a 50-person society. Even the smallest town inevitably has thousands in it. And even if you live in a 50-person town, you can just move. You could go through life making enemies of every single person you meet, and it would never matter because you just move on to the next place where no one knows who you are. I do not recommend it, but it is an option. Whatever the crackpots might try to tell you, men are attracted to a certain thing and women are attracted to a different thing. And while there are some modifiers with respect to which cultures they come from, they are still fundamentally the same things. Men are looking for health, women are looking for power, abundance and stability. One mistake that both men and women make is in trying to become more attractive. They try to become more attractive to themselves. Men will spend countless hours dieting and in the gym hoping to reach the level of peak physical form to attract women. And women will spend years of their life getting an advanced degree and buying a house. These are not bad goals in and of themselves, but they are bad goals if what you are trying to do is attract the other sex. Imagine a horseshoe magnet. One piece of the magnet is the South Pole. The other side of the magnet is the North Pole. With magnets, like poles repel each other and unlike poles attract. If a sentient North Pole was hoping to attract a South Pole, and made this mistake, it would become a powerful South Pole magnet it was attracted to, driving the South Pole away powerfully. The correct answer for this lonely North Pole is to become a better North Pole. Sun Tzu in The Art of War suggests thus it is that in war the victorious strategist only seeks battle after the victory has been won, whereas he who is destined to defeat first fights and afterwards looks for victory. It isn't the same in love as in war, that to rush in without any understanding of how you might be successful is to choose failure. One of the early seminal guides on meeting women I think applies to women trying to meet men as well in terms of one of the core strategies that they talk about. Find, meet, attract, close. This framework is important because it talks about steps that are required along the process. There are entirely too many people who are willfully ignorant of the basics and just assume that magical thinking will get them to where they want in life. Generally speaking, that is not true. Yes, there are some people who just naturally have a knack for meeting people, but even those people still have to follow a process. They just happen to do a better job intuiting the process early on. This whole essay is sort of a chimera of different styles and methods. I spent many hours while single reviewing different dating coaches and trying to find what insights I could use from each. My intent here is not to pass on 1,000 bits and routines and gambits to turn you into a sleazy pickup artist, but to give you a framework you can use to get started and understand what you're looking at using the find, meet, attract, close framework to give you some ideas about how other people think and some practical advice, stuff that helped me along the way. I have specifically rejected a lot of the advice I find morally reprehensible, of which there is much. In the essay My Existential Crisis I talked about building a code of ethics and living by it, and how at the end of the day you have to be able to look at yourself in the mirror and live with your choices. And that's no different here. Even if you achieve every goal you set for yourself in life but you do so through unscrupulous means, then you haven't truly succeeded because the weight of your misdeeds will sit on your shoulders forever. Imagine if you manipulate another person into loving you, and you get married, and you spend your life together. But every time you see her you know you lied and continue to lie. That would be a burden heavy enough to break most people. The first step in our framework is to find. It is a general statement, but I think it is a true one that most of the time men hang out with other men, and women hang out with other women. That being the case, it is going to be really hard to meet somebody if all the people that you hang out with have the specific quality of not being people you are interested in romantically. Honestly, people who have friend groups that are made up of both men and women are overwhelmingly more likely to find romantic success than equal or better people who have friend groups exclusively consisting of their own sex. It's simply a matter of availability. You can be the greatest guy in the world, and if nobody knows that you exist then you do not. Now for the purposes that I'm talking about. Going out of your comfort zone and going to the places that the sort of people that you want to meet go is a key part of meeting someone. It is a simple concept, but one that most people end up missing out on. When I was growing up, I was always a very nerdy guy. At that time, this was before the Zuckerbergs of the world had changed computers into something everybody carried around in their pocket. At that time, being a computer nerd was decidedly uncool, and so, the sort of people who I hung around with were male. The reasons for that are simple. Men tend to be more willing to take risks and do things that are not perfectly safe socially speaking. Men also tend to be more interested in things than people. So in both cases computers at the time were a very male hobby. You spent an awful lot of time reading books and clicking away on a little thing that did not have a whole lot of connections to the outside world. And you did not spend a whole lot of time socializing because you were considered kind of a social pariah for your interests. You ended up where almost everyone you hung out with was male because they were the only other ones who were willing to take that risk until a woman showed up. Say what you will about a bunch of nerds, they were still men and that one woman realistically kind of had her pick. Being the sole woman in an all-male space meant that she was at a distinct advantage to all the women who did not bother coming into that space. By contrast, each individual man had basically no chance with the girl because there were dozens of you and one of her. Most small communities of nerdy people have their stories about the woman, and it does not really matter which particular community you are talking about because it does not really matter. The one woman would be put up on this giant pedestal because she was the only one, and it did not really matter her physical attributes or if she was even a halfway decent person because there was only one of her, and there was a dozen of you. What are you going to do? Kick the one woman out of the club? Not bloody likely. By contrast, a lot of men who have managed to find themselves accepted in female-only spaces do not tend to have a whole lot of problems meeting women, because they already have found women. When I was young, the advice that I always ended up getting was go outside. This is kind of bad advice because it does not really say much. You can go into your backyard and you are outside, but that does not mean anything. Thus, my specific piece of advice is not to just go outside, but to leave your home and go somewhere that the opposite sex is. It is probably going to be somewhere that makes you feel very uncomfortable because that is how this works. But unless you win the lottery, you are going to have to put yourself into some uncomfortable situations for a while to get the sort of things that you want out of life. So, you found some people of the opposite sex. What next? Just because you can see that they exist does not mean you have done anything special. If you show up every day to the beach where the pretty girls go and do not say a word, guess what? You are a creep. The next step is to meet people. This is a social skill that can be either really easy or really difficult in that it depends entirely on the sort of person you are in your life experiences. If you are like me, an extreme introvert, and you have life experiences like mine that make you quiet and shy, you also have, as I mentioned earlier, extreme anxiety about speaking to the opposite sex. That makes sense. It is written into your biology. So, there are a few things that you can do here. But the bottom line is, at some point you have to walk up to someone and start a conversation. This is a lot easier the younger you are, and as you get older, well, I'm sure that there is some sort of bell curve at work here. I have this nagging suspicion that when you are very young it is relatively easy. As you get into your prime years it gets a lot harder, and then later on as you get older you run out of crap to give, and it becomes really easy to talk to whoever that you want. However, nothing worth having comes without some level of risk and some level of pain. I'm not a pickup artist, I'm a happily married man, and I'm also rapidly approaching middle age if I'm not already there, and that makes it difficult to head out to the club and start spitting game at 20-year-old women. But forget about spitting game for a moment. That sort of high-stakes pain is for super experienced guys who are used to that sort of thing. A great thing to do? Figure out a completely non-threatening way to approach anyone. Particularly if you are in a more social setting, you can usually just approach a mixed group crowd and start talking, and you have a little bit where most people are polite enough that they will indulge you. One thing that is really neat is you do not actually have to say anything complicated. A lot of things that are recommended by the guys who do this sort of thing for a living are acting like you are just trying to get some different responses for a question that you need answered. There are a lot of neat little hot button topics that you can start a conversation about, and you are not going to offend anyone, but everyone is going to have an opinion. People like to give their opinion. I should know, I'm writing an entire book of them. When you are in your sort of prime meeting people years, you kind of want to keep your eyes open because you never know when something interesting will come about. A great conversation starter would be something like, "Hey guys, just a moment, I need to ask a quick question. I'm just trying to help my friend. He has photos of his ex-girlfriend sitting under his bed. He does not do anything weird with him, he just keeps them as mementos of his past relationships, and his girlfriend wants him to burn them or she's going to break up with him. What do you think about that? What do you think he should do?" Full stop for a minute. We got to talk about something that is going to be very important every step of the way. In the industry they call it calibration. Calibration is paying attention to the people that you are talking to in order to see how they are reacting to the thing that you are saying. A lot of the time, their body language is going to be telling you exactly where they are at. Calibration is key to ethically meeting people. Some stupid people think that consent is this explicit thing you have to whip out a pre-printed contract to establish. That's very stupid, and isn't how human beings act. Instead, people give you subtle cues that they want you to stop or continue continuously. And so as you push ahead, it's your ethical duty as a polite individual who seeks truth and respects others' rights to pay attention and stop yourself from doing something they don't want to do, and to move on if you've clearly just struck out. You aren't entitled to success with a particular woman. If you didn't convince her, that's your failure. Move on. Better luck next time. Back when I was single, I approached a group who was the only group in the bar at the time, and started talking to them, and you could tell they were more than happy to have a cute guy at the table talking to them. I was anxious as hell, but paying attention and realizing that they were open to talking to me for a bit helped me out. Every step of the way there are things you can be doing to sort of calibrate and get a feel for things. At this stage, you should be able to tell right away just by looking at everyone if they seem amenable to answering your question. Just as a good person, you should be constantly calibrating. If you are talking to someone and it seems like they are kind of losing interest in you, maybe it is time to move on. On the other hand, if they seem really interested in you, then great, keep at it. There are even little things that you can throw, little questions you can ask. You do not need to be a psychic. Sometimes you can just ask, "Hey, you guys seem cool. Mind if I chat with you for a bit?" And if they like you, they will say yes, and if they do not like you, they will say no, and sometimes they do not like you, but they are being polite, and will say yes anyway. But usually that is pretty obvious as long as you are paying attention, which is the key thing here. Like I said though, this does not just end here. This is going to have to keep on going right up until forever actually. I have been married for 10 years and I still calibrate with my wife. Because that is just what you do when you are a good person. You end up getting a little bit more latitude obviously. You do not need to ask your wife of 10 years who's carrying your son whether it is okay if you talk to her if her friends would approve. But sometimes you got to just stop and go, hey, do you really feel like hearing this right now? When there just seems to be a look on her face, and sometimes she'll come back and say, I got a lot on my mind right now, maybe we could do this another time, or no, I'm really interested in this, I'm just thinking about what you are saying. So you are going to be having to calibrate when you find women, because there are definitely a lot of situations where maybe you do not want to be going and finding those women. And when you meet women, there are going to be times when you can immediately tell you are not welcome. And it is just time to go out, never mind, I will chat with you later. And sometimes you will be at a point where you are trying to attract a girl and you realize there is just no chemistry. And it is time to move on because you are just not getting the calibration back that you expected. Sometimes you will be right there at the finishing line and you will just realize that somewhere along the way you messed up. And maybe it is time to go into salvage mode, but maybe it is time to pull the plug. It can happen at any point. The key here is that you have to keep your eyes open. You have to be paying attention because human beings are inherently social animals. And they are constantly giving you cues as long as you get out of your head and start paying attention. Often, those cues are not subtle. There is another thing I want to mention right now, because it is the #1 destroyer of dreams. One-itis. This is a chronic disease, a chronic inflammation of the feeling that person you like is the one. Symptoms of one-itis include chasing after some guy or some chick who does not like you nearly as much as you like them. Constantly being there for someone right before they move on to the next boyfriend or girlfriend who is not you. Feeling like you need to confront someone over your romantic feelings. If you feel like you need to confront someone over your romantic feelings, it is almost 100% certain they are not interested, and you really need to stop wasting your time chasing after someone who does not actually like you. I have helped a number of men find romance. In virtually every case, they needed help mostly because instead of going out and trying to meet new women, they had the one that they had often spent years courting in a very passive way. You know, people are not stupid. A woman knows full well that you are trying to get with her. And if you are a woman and you are giving attention to a man, he knows it. Maybe not immediately, but if you have known someone for years, and it has never come up. I'm not saying that it cannot happen where you proclaim your love to your friend and it just so happens that they had the same unrequited feelings as you. But the fact is it is almost never the case. Usually, you are putting a bunch of expectations on someone who really does not deserve the pressure of expectations they have never given you any reason to have. You are not happy, they are not happy, it is just not good. In 2 cases where I helped guys meet women, those guys finally managed to rip their eyes away from the one, and they went out and met people that they actually liked and liked them back. We live in a world of 8 billion people. Half of those are people of the sex you're looking for. Hundreds of millions of them are in the age range that you are looking for. Thousands or maybe even millions are within dating distance of you. More than likely. If you are spending a bunch of time racing after someone who does not really like you, you are being an idiot. There are other fish in the sea. I'm not saying that you need to cut every single relationship the moment that things get bad. But what I am saying is chase after people who like you. Chasing after someone who does not is a great recipe for getting used. On that topic, remember that dating is a two-way street. You aren't just trying to ruthlessly be accepted, you're trying to see if you like the other person too. The point of dating is not all people are the same. So you can see if you get along, and if you go, oh wow, this person is unattractive and boring and I don't feel comfortable with this, you can move on with your life. And if you go, oh wow, is this person ever cool? Then you can move forward with things. So let us move on to this idea of attraction. There is a sardonic joke out there. Rule 1, be attractive. Rule 2, do not be unattractive. It sounds silly, but it is actually true. The thing is, you need to understand what is and is not attractive. Of course, everybody easily gets the superficial stuff. Be fit, have genetically good looks, have genetically perfect hair. But you remember what I said at the beginning of this, that men and women both seek different things in terms of being attractive. It certainly is harder for women because many indicators of health are things you do not really have a lot of control over. And some of them are things that even if you do have control over them, they are hard to control. They say to be skinny, but reality is losing weight is one of the hardest things on the face of the planet. People who have never had to lose weight do not understand that. Not if they are naturally more inclined to being skinny. It is nightmarishly difficult. It does not happen overnight. You have to make a concerted effort to silence one of your #1 essential urges. One of those voices in your head that from birth is telling you that if you do not do this thing you will die. Even if we know it is not true, it is not like turning off a light switch silencing that voice. You know what though? There are ways to make it work. You can prove that you are healthy in ways that do not have anything to do with your looks. How do you do that? One way to prove that you are healthy and spunky is through your behaviors, attitudes, and mannerisms. Another way that really does help is showing you are either part of their tribe or part of a tribe they would like to join. That is pretty universal, to be honest. Fat women get laid, get relationships both short-term and long-term, and get married every single day. And it might shock you how often the men who put a ring on that finger are thankful for the privilege. For men, being attractive is more complicated than just being healthy. A lot of men seem to think that all you need to do is be healthy and be basically friendly, and you will be good. I have got a news flash here. Most passively beautiful women get hit on from the moment that they turn about 13, until probably they turn about 50. Every day, usually multiple times a day. There is this legend of that beautiful woman who has never been told she is beautiful that movies just love to peddle. It is not true. It is a lie. The reason that happens in romantic comedies is that romantic comedies are designed for people who do not have love in their life. They are designed as a wish fulfillment fantasy. The idea is that you have these absolute knockout women on screen, and the women who cannot find a man who are watching these movies imagine themselves in that role. And that is why they do it. Because that story is relatable. Overwhelmingly, the stories in movies are not going to be the real kind of stories that a beautiful woman lives. First of all, because if you are not experiencing them firsthand, the real stories are kind of boring. And second of all, because the stories would probably make you hate said beautiful women. You should not. That is just their life. We all have our reality, and our realities come with benefits and drawbacks. Ugly men fantasize about being popular and noticed by everyone. Beautiful women fantasize about just being left alone. The way for a man to not be part of this mass of boring people that are constantly hitting on her is to not try to just show that you are interested. Instead, you should be trying to show that you are interesting. Having stories about places you have gone and people you have seen and things you have done. Having interesting topics to talk about. Being passionate about different things. You know, even if she is not interested in whatever you are interested in, a lot of women are going to be interested in the fact that you are interested in something. It is kind of remarkable when you think about it. But it is true. That is not carte blanche to go out and inundate some woman with stories about your Warhammer 40k cosplay. But you know, the fact that you have some kind of interest. That is interesting. Now you might be saying, well, how am I supposed to have all these stories? I'm not interesting. Well, the best way to seem interesting is to be interesting. That means leaving your house and going off to do cool things. When I was single, I started a list of neat things that I wanted to go out and do so that I could talk about the neat things that I'd gone out and done. Some of them were big things like going on a giant road trip or this or that. But some of them were really small things. I had never eaten sushi, so I decided to go out and get some sushi. This was before sushi was everywhere, so trying to find a specific restaurant that actually had good sushi so that I could find out all about it and have a good experience was really interesting. The fact is, most people are fairly boring, especially beautiful people. They do not need to be that interesting, because they are beautiful. The point is, though, being interesting helps. Another thing that I found out is this serves two purposes. By going out and doing things and being interesting even when there is no one else involved, you also save yourself the trouble of trying to come up with interesting things to do later when you start getting dates. That brings us to closing. When you are talking about this sort of thing, a close is any time that you bring things to the next level. People make the mistake of trying to set some sort of big goal, like getting to the kiss, or getting to the makeout, or getting to the bedroom. That is kind of the wrong way to look at things. That is not how human beings work. What you should be trying to do instead is constantly calibrating to see if you think it might be a good time to move forward, and then incrementally moving forward. You move from talking to everyone except this person in their group, to talking to everyone including that person in your group, to maybe having a little bit of a lone chat with that person, to slowly and making sure that she is into it moving into starting to have a bit of completely non-sexual touching like tapping their arm. Anytime you calibrate and find out if it is okay. Of course, you are not going to be asking every time because you are going to look like an idiot. You are going to be using your eyes and your brain, and if you push a little bit too hard and you see them sort of clench up like they are not happy with what just happened, back off a little bit. It can mean either you have completely screwed it up and she is just not into you, or it can mean that she is just not ready for this yet, and you need to spend a little bit more time before you move forward. Unfortunately, that sort of thing takes experience to figure out. Of course, I'm speaking from the point of view of a man, but the same thing applies to women. You are slowly making little closes and just gauging the reaction and seeing how things are going. You know, women are terrified of men. What most women do not realize is that men are also terrified of women. Nobody wants to be the first one to make a move. Partly because making a move is set up in our culture to be this big thing instead of just one little step in a series of progressive movements. Therefore, if you like a guy, maybe give him a hand. Especially if it seems like he likes you back. You do not need to be full-on cavewoman pounding over the head with a club and dragging him back to your place. But pushing a guy a bit can go a long way towards making something work. Especially today, when frankly it is terrifying being a guy. Our entire genetic makeup is sort of designed for the man to take charge in this interaction. And so does our culture. That would all be fine and dandy except it is pretty high stakes now. Make the wrong move on the wrong person and your life just ended. There are a lot of examples of people hitting on someone who didn't want it and the person uses that moment as a weapon against that person, destroying their careers and their lives. It is tough out there. Do not make the mistake of thinking that I'm sitting here defending the terrible people who do terrible things. What I am saying is those people getting their just desserts means that a lot of innocent people end up getting put in some bad situations that they did not really deserve. Like it or not, this is the world we live in now. If you're a woman and you're sitting there alone and you do not know why and you do not know what to do about it, maybe give that guy that you like a hand. A man I respect once said a girl asked me out once. I married her. Grayson, your mom made it clear she liked me before we even were involved romantically, and it made it much easier for me to move forward with chatting with her. asking her out, and things moved so easily. We were married in a blink of an eye, relatively speaking. All this talk of calibration, it is super important, especially for the guys. Forget about getting slapped across the face. The reality is that although we are no longer living in a 50-person society, we are living in a society where, if you miscalculate and push things too far, it can mean your life. There have been many times where what a guy thought was just playing turned out to the woman to be terrifying behavior. When a woman thinks your behavior is terrifying, you messed up somewhere. If you push it too far, they can come back later and you can get cancelled. Or you can go to jail for something that you thought was innocent but is not. Therefore, every single step of the way it is incredibly important to make sure that you and she are on the same page. I would not be surprised the way the world is going if eventually the same standards start to apply to women, and it is going to be a lot more of a culture shock for them than it was for us. It has always been kind of understood that men are bigger and stronger than women, so we have a duty to make sure we are not pushing things that are not wanted on the other side. I think it is going to soon be the standard for both sexes. So now that I have gotten some basic advice and techniques down pat, let us talk about some stuff that hopefully might keep you safe. Just keep your eyes open, and maybe you will be able to avoid some stuff that a lot of people have to go through. There are a lot of crazy people in the world. By the time you reach a certain age, you and probably a lot of people that you know will probably have some sort of story about someone who seemed to be really nice at first but turned out to be a psycho. There are a bunch of ways that this can manifest, and it is not their fault. But just because it is not their fault does not mean it is not a problem. Watch out for the narcissist. They are the sort of people who really think the world revolves around them. They are going to like you at first if you pay attention to them, and you will probably feel good because they give you attention back. The problem with that is you two are not playing the same game. Eventually you will realize that person is really all about just getting as much attention as possible. And often getting attention does not necessarily mean in positive ways. Ironically, these are the sort of people who are going to immediately jump all over me after reading this, because making a huge deal over things is kind of their thing. Pretending that they care about others is a great way to get attention. Watch out for the borderline personality. Borderline personality disorder is characterized by a number of different things, including chaotic interpersonal relationships, problems with impulsive decision-making, and watch for this one, a tendency to go in between ideation and demonization of a person. In short, one day you will be the king, and the next you will be the biggest monster in the world. Every step of the way it is going to seem genuine because as far as they know it is. The biggest danger with this is if you do not catch it early on, and you end up getting pulled into something way too fast. Then suddenly you have made some kind of lifelong commitment, whether it is marriage, or a kid, or something significant, and then you realize they are crazy. It is no good. One of the other symptoms of this disease is a desperate and irrational fear that people are going to leave them. Unfortunately, it turns out to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. No good person is going to stand by and happily get falsely accused of cheating again and again and again. Eventually they leave because they do not deserve this sort of treatment. You really need to watch out though, because when someone thinks that you are the devil, they are okay with using whatever means necessary to hurt you. Particularly after you break up with such a person, there is every reason in the world to believe that they are going to try to go after you through your family, the police, or some whisper network. They are going to do whatever they can to hurt you because you are the devil now. Early on, it is kind of hard to recognize. If you are a legitimately good person who just happens to really like someone, and you are not mentally ill in any way, you can end up scaring off a lot of people. Not because you deserve to, but because people like that end up making people's nightmares come true. Watch out for the vacation in Cancun. There are people who are super fun, super full of energy, completely uninhibited. They come into your normal life and you are just swept off your feet. It is so much fun and you kind of wish that it would never end. But it is a vacation in Cancun. Cancun is a city in Mexico that a lot of college kids go to vacation. If you are a tourist, it is a fantastic place to go for a couple weeks. The beaches are beautiful with resorts where you can get free booze. There are lots of exciting things to go do such as going to seedy bars and all kinds of neat stuff. The problem comes if you were to decide to go live in Cancun. You see, once the vacation is over, Cancun is a terrible place to live. There are drug cartels constantly doing crazy stuff. People are constantly getting kidnapped and ransomed. And the typical person living there is dirt poor. The reason why a bunch of middle-class Americans can go have an all-expenses-paid trip in Cancun is that basically nobody makes any money, so the amount of money that they bring in is massive compared to what natives make. So, Cancun is a great place to go visit for a while. But if you stay there, you are probably going to die. Those exciting seedy bars become dens of criminal activity in the city you live in. Those tourists who were so much fun when you were one of them are suddenly just draining, because you are constantly having to deal with them and their drunken antics. The pace of a city filled with tourists all the time will just wear you out. You will just want to take a break and get some quiet. But you cannot, because you live in Cancun. If you are planning on sticking around with someone, use your brain. Think about whether this person is actually someone that you can see yourself spending time with a little way down the line once the party ends. I guarantee you that eventually, you are going to want the party to end, at least for a little bit. Be aware of the person who is a victim of the entire world. You must be very careful, because there are people who, the moment that they leave the room, will immediately start bad-mouthing you, and they will do the same thing to everybody else. At first you are going to think that life has really handed this person a raw deal, but often if you take the time to get to know that person, you are going to realize more often than not that they have been handed every opportunity on a silver platter and turned it away. The moment that you leave the room, they are going to start talking about how bad you have treated them, because you are just another person in the world. Because of the way that these people view themselves in the world, they have got absolutely no problem with using others and then acting as if they were being used the whole time. Not everything is bad out there though. There is a lot of really good stuff in the world, and being aware of the potential bad things should not blind you. There are the potentially good things. There are people that are kind of a diamond in the rough. People that have been overlooked. People who would be amazing if they were just given a chance. The trick is to realize that those people do exist. But if you see them right away, they are probably not who you think they are. Remember earlier, when I said that there were lots of women who were routinely hit on? That is particularly true if you are just a regular old hot girl. That regular old hot girl probably is not a diamond in the rough. Now, maybe if the looks are not perfect. Maybe if there is something about her that is off-putting at first. That is the trick. Dating is like a market, whether you take that analogy to be mean-spirited or not. It is like a market in economics. If you think about it, everyone is trying to find the best product at the lowest price. In terms of economics though, not every person has the same value for every product. To use a computer analogy, because that is the worst analogy I can possibly think of, some people think that a Mac is very valuable because of all the things that come with a Mac. On the other hand, you could not give some people a Mac because they just do not want one, due to all the things that come with the Mac. Some people think that a PC is very valuable because of all the things that come with it being a PC. On the other hand, there is people that you could not give a PC because the things about a PC make it very useless to them. Despite the two products being exactly the same, for two different people they have a completely different meaning. The same goes for people. For some people, the loud, gregarious, outspoken person is incredibly attractive. For others, the same person is incredibly annoying. Besides that, there can also be a difference between a person's actual value and the value that they are perceived to have. When people are playing stocks, they are not just buying and selling pieces of paper. What they are doing is trying to outsmart everybody else. They are trying to figure out which stocks are actually valuable, but not being priced as valuable yet. At the same time, they are trying to figure out which stocks are actually valueless, but are priced very high. Finding those discrepancies is how a trader makes his money. To me, finding a person who is valued differently than what the market says that they should be is how you find a truly good person. Generally speaking, particularly for men, nobody realizes that someone is a good man until they are already spoken for permanently by a good woman. The opposite is also true though. There are a lot of times that a good woman is just not given the respect that she deserves until it is entirely too late. Grayson, your mother and I consider each other like this. When we met, lots of women had an opportunity to date me, but weren't interested. Lots of men had an opportunity to date her, but weren't interested. We found each other, saw the value we each held. Over time we brought out the best in each other, and later on a lot of people wished they'd taken the opportunity when they could. But we were already married. There are a lot of pickup artists or dating coaches out there who are willing to take your money, and take your time and try to teach you how to pick up women. Some of those methods are very effective. You must be aware of something though. At the end of the day, you are going to run out of material eventually, and you will have to live with being you. There was one guy who warned about this, calling victims of this social robots. They could walk into the scene and recite hundreds of hours of canned routines from the best coaches, and it worked for them for the purposes of getting one night with somebody. But after that, they do not have anything else. All they are is this one thing. It sounds great for your life to be just going off and doing this, but it is not. Reality is not that kind. I have known a lot of very successful men on the dating front, and the problem is that it is very exciting in the moment. But you are not actually building anything if you are not building real lasting relationships. Eventually, you are not going to be 25 anymore. You will be 30, or 40, or God forbid 50. You want to be somebody who has nothing other than a bunch of notches on his belt, with nothing else to show for your life by the time you turn 50. Even if you are excellent at it, what will you have to show for it? A decade away from retirement, and all you will have to show for it is another 20-something hanging off your arm, a few decades from death. So, this is one of my longer essays, because there is an awful lot to go over. Let us take a look at what we have talked about. We started talking a little bit about safety. We talked about the concept of find, meet, attract, and close. We have talked extensively about calibration. We have talked about one-itis. We have talked about a few different things to keep an eye out for because they could end up dangerous. And we have also talked about some opportunities, where you might just find somebody nobody realizes is amazing. This is just advice. You need to get out there and live. Thanks for listening to this chapter of the Graysonian Ethic, Lessons for My Unborn Son. If you like the book and would like a physical copy or an electronic copy, please look it up. It's available on Amazon around the world. Barring that, please like and share with others. I'll be releasing one chapter every week, so if it hasn't been completely released, If you're interested in hearing more, you can subscribe to see when I post additional chapters.